I recall a community event that I went to one time with Alistair Coburn, because he lives in the area. I think he lives in Sarasota or something like that. Maybe he lives in Clearwater. I can't remember where he lives. I can't remember.
He's nearby.
Yeah, he's nearby.
For sure.
And he was like the people that we left out of the Agile Manifesto and like the whole process and everything we put together. He's like, yeah, it was the BAs that we left out. Because he's like, we really didn't need them. You know, we want to talk directly to the customer and talk about the customer's needs, and then translate that and write code off of it. He's like, I don't need an intermediary talking to the customer and then translating what the customer said to me. Mm-hmm. He's like, the power of agility is the customer talks directly to me, and then we talk directly back and forth and figure out what they need and then present them something quickly. I was like, oh, well, that's yeah, I guess that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's been, I don't know, the idea of the BA, I mean, I go back and forth on it all the time, because what do people normally say is I translate, and I'm like, if I dumb this down to where my brain can actually understand it, I'm thinking you're having an issue having a person talk to another person.
Yeah.
You know, I translate. Well, what are you translating? I mean, are we speaking different languages? Well, that's the thing, is I have to take it from the customer and put it into what the developers speak. And I'm just like, at some point along the lines, whether it be in 1990, 1995, the .com 2000, we began to not being able to be a person that could work, but you couldn't talk to people who consume the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, so then the BA was born.
Yeah.
And so now I'm caught in a back and forth, is like, do I invest the time in and spend money having that BA to bridge that, and the developers like it, and some teams do like it.
Yeah.
But some team members are like, I wish I was better at talking to people, so then I'd rather just invest in them and say, look, I'd like to talk to people more.
Yeah. So I've been deployed as a product owner for a few times now. I think I've been a product owner actually more than I've been a Scrum Master. The effectiveness of a product owner can certainly be extended by having a business analyst that works for them, that does, I'm going to say grunt work, but it's not. That's not. It's not the work. It's not the term that I mean. But it's like the BA can do a lot of heavy lifting for the product owner they work for. They can do a lot of heavy lifting. You know, they can pound out a bunch of requirements or figure out a lot of in-depth, like we were talking about before. When I was on the data platform, the analysts that I had on the data platform, product owner would say, I want to build this dashboard. And in order to build this dashboard, for example, engagements like prospects, engagements with prospects, or something like that. I can't remember. It's like engagements that we're currently in that we can make more money off of, basically. So you need the Salesforce system for that. You need whatever system does client billing. I don't remember. It's been a while. And then another system which tracks your people's time. You need the time tracking system. You need the system that holds how much money you're making off the client, and you need all the client contacts and stuff like that. So you need 3 different systems to build a dashboard. Well, you as a product owner would say, you go to the whiteboard, you go into the room where your team is. Let's pretend everyone is together for a second. For the purposes,
you're dating yourself.
I know. For the purposes of shortcutting the conversation of what I actually would do, we'll go into a room where my team is, and I'll go up onto the board, and I'll be like, okay, I want my dashboard to look like this. I want my little pie graph with whatever, because it's always a silly pie graph to start with, and say, here are my, or maybe it's my top 10. I don't know what it would look like, but you draw out what you want. Right? This is what I want. And then your team would dig into it and be like, well, that's what you say you want. Maybe this is what you really want. And then there'd be some kind of negotiation, right? Yeah. And then somebody would have to figure out, from there, out of what you're saying you want, what is possible, and then what can you actually get your hands on? You know, what actually exists. So in that instance, what I just described, I would be coming to the team in refinement to be like, here's my plans for what I want to build in the future. And then the team would dig into a bit, right? I'm sure. But at the same time, I could deploy my business analyst before I had that meeting to say, hey, go analyze the Salesforce database and go analyze my whatever time tracking database and go analyze whatever, and figure out, you know, how many different tables or whatever involved in what I'm asking for. And if they can come back to that meeting with actual low-level technical details that the team's going to ask the product owner questions about, and maybe your product owner has no SQL experience at all, their eyes will glaze over when you start talking about what tables and foreign key relationships and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Well, we can't do this because we'd have to update here, and then we got triggers here, and blah blah blah. And then the product owner's like, "Well, I don't care. Figure it out." You know.
That's not such a bad thing, though. Sometimes.
Yeah. I mean,
Keep them out of the weeds.
That's the way I've looked at it in every place I've been. But like the BA keeps your product owner from having to get into the weeds, which is good because as a team member, you want the product owner representing the future of the business. You don't want them in the feature factory mode where they're just people from the business are just taking a ticket and being like, build this next, build this next, build this next.
Yep. And
then you're like, well, wow, now my product owner, like they're a product owner. They're less of a product manager and more of a product owner. That's the way to say that.
I just call those product renters. They really don't have the ability to change much. They can do some stuff on the surface, but at the end of the day, somebody else is calling the shots. So
there's a lot of power there, in my opinion. The danger of that setup is when the product owner stops coming to the meetings and it's just the BA representing the product owner. And now, whenever the team has a question, they got to cycle it through the BA who goes back to the product owner and comes back to the team. And now there's a delay, and now you're in a bad spot. Now you're somewhere you don't want to be,
Yeah. You get there. But depending on how mature the team is, because they're always going to form around when that missing spot's there and it starts doing that, the teams should feel comfortable speaking up, and then the BA should also feel the pinch there. It's like, I'm the intermediary. But it's hard to speak up because you've got a job. I mean, you've got a purpose, and you're like, somebody comes here, and I get to tell them, and then they come back to me, and you get really infatuated with that need of yourself, and it's hard to take a step back and go, I love that I'm helping, but it's not efficient. That's very difficult to do. You know? So you just got to understand. The last time I put on a product owner hat, no, it wasn't the last time, but a while back, I became so obsessed. So everybody's heard of it. As a product owner, the biggest thing that you can do is be customer obsessed, right? Mm-hmm. When you're building a product for customers, be customer obsessed. I became so customer obsessed, I felt like I lost my way. And we didn't have a BA on the team, and it was good, but the issue is that I spent so much time doing focus groups and interviews and working with our UX team that the day-to-day, I eventually took sight off that, assuming, hey, this team's mature. They've got it. When they tell me their commitments, I have to trust them, and I step away and I focus on the future because they need me there. Yeah. That I did lose my way a little bit in the day-to-day, and there's times when I'd forget, or the customer would directly contradict themselves based on week-to-week focus groups. But in 2021, that's going to happen even more. Is trying to understand insights from customers because they change their mind.
Well, customers going to change their mind based off of the way the market is going. But
I wish I had a BA back then, because then they would have been like, "Hey, stupid, wake up! We need you here. Help us here, because you're asking for one thing and then you're saying another." So.
Well, the BA can kind of glue all that stuff together. I think that's probably the biggest power, is they can kind of glue all that stuff together. At the software startup that I was a product manager for, that was contract product manager for, I was definitely a product manager and a product owner. The differentiation, because I ask this when I go into interviews, when I'm interviewing candidates, both when I'm interviewing candidates and when I go into interviews, I'll ask, do you have a strong delineation for what a product manager and a product owner is at this company, and who does those roles? Because I'll ask, if I'm on a team as a product owner, to me the difference is a product manager will spend let me stop for a second because I get ahead of myself. For me, at a software startup, I'm doing both because they don't have multiple employees. It's just me. It's the army of one. Woo, yeah, it's just me. My aim would be to roughly spend half my time with the teams, with the development teams, making sure that we are building the right thing, that we're on track, kind of like communicating back to the business. But the other half is product management. With product management is communicating with stakeholders, anybody outside. So the product owners, stakeholders to me is internal, external. So now we're getting I guess we're getting into semantics now. The point of me saying is product owner is to my team and being beholden to my team, make sure they're on track. And the product manager is being beholden to people outside the company, assuming you have external people and you don't just have an internal product, but whatever, people outside the team. Let me say it that way. I was trying to split my time as 50-50 as possible between my teams and outside stakeholders. That was a long-winded way of saying that. What I always found was there are some stakeholders that will just bog you down the whole time. You know, they'll take way more than 50%. So it was hard to keep that. And obviously the first thing everybody does, especially at larger companies, the first thing everybody does is you just work longer hours. You know, that's the go-to.
At a startup?
Yeah, especially at a startup.
Oh, yeah.
That's expected, you know. And I think the higher the salary you go, the more it's expected as well, you know.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, I prescribe to that thought process. It's just at some point the awareness. I mean, it took me a while to do that because I was, you know, bumping 52, 56. You know, as a consultant, you get that wave. You know, but as I moved to salary, I'm like, you know, what I'm giving you is if I force myself to be in that 40-hour mark, I become much more self-aware.
Yeah.
And much more picky with my time. And I get it. Some people go, you know, you're a salaried employee. Sorry, but 40 hours isn't what a salaried employee is. And it's like, man, you know, that's not a work culture that sounds very healthy to me. So why not look at the 40 and then say, am I owning too much? And most of the time it is that. I'm owning too much. Like you said, you know, I'm a product owner and a product manager. I'm doing 2 jobs in one.
Right, yeah.
But then it also comes down to my interactions with those people. Am I having meetings with people because their actions are very, while attempting to be noble, are very counterproductive to what we're trying to do or what they're wanting. You know, hey, I'm expecting A, B, and C, so I'm spending more time with you. But by doing that, you're only getting A and B.
Yeah.
Because you're spending so much time with me, you're not getting C, and you have to wait. And just identifying those types of things. And in an agile world, I mean, time is money. I mean, everybody talks about Agile and going fast, but I'm like, you know, in the grand scheme of things, Agile really highlights the need to slow down even more, and it's only slowing down to which it's healthy and sustainable. Because the sustainability piece is everyone, you've heard it, the buzzword. I get burned out in Agile. It's like, do you get burned out in Agile? No, I just overcommit in our sprints, or people over promise things, or we start talking in Gantt charts, you know, as you said, project plans, and that's when you get into trouble, because then they hook that back and they go, Agile did this, and it's like, Agile didn't do this.
You're right. Yeah.
What happened is the human element came into play, and it proceeded to overtake what Agile is, because it's a change in thought process. That's the biggest thing for an Agile world, is that you're dealing with people. It's not about the software delivery or anything like that. Once you get past the people, a transformation is very easy, with the caveat that your business model has to support it. Some business models don't support an Agile software delivery model. They really don't, because, I mean, you worked in data for a long time. I've worked in data. I've worked in some other areas. But specifically, if you're having to not move to the cloud and you have to restand up a new instance, as your costs grow and you bring on more clients, they astronomically will go more. So you have to be compartmentalized. You have to build something that you can actually onboard a new customer without having to spin up a brand new instance in an 18-month project. That's a long time in 2021.
Yeah.
So,
well, in that instance, like, it was the same thing for me when I was in QA automation. When I was a QA manager, the big push for me was to automation, because the company had, wow, this is a tangent. this is a throwback tangent right now.
It's like QA. How many years ago?
This was in I ended 2018 was when I stepped out of QA for the last time. But
That's not too bad.
But like the last time I was on like an actual project as a team member would have been 4 years before, 2014, 13, 14, when I was an actual team member. I was a team lead for a while.
There's 2 timelines right now. There's pre-COVID and there's post-COVID.
Yeah.
And that's just where it's at.
Luckily, I'm gonna hide in the pre-COVID timeline, just somewhere at the end of time. I don't even know why I'm talking about this, but I'm already down this road, so I'm gonna keep going. The company had a mobile application, and this was in logistics, so it was for like truck drivers and stuff like that, right? And the mobile application allowed the truck drivers to like so they could scan their paperwork. Like, truck drivers have paperwork, like every time they stop somewhere, they have to get something signed, or they have to prove that they delivered the load to whoever, or get somebody's signature or whatever. Or if there's a problem, they have to like note the problem. They have special forms to fill out. Anyway, it lets them scan those forms, send them back to their home office. You take a picture of it, and then it turns it into digital. Maybe it scrapes some information off the page and sends it in. And then there's other rules that truck drivers have to abide by. Like, they can only drive drive for a certain number of hours until they have to rest and stuff.
They have the ELD mandate.
Yeah. They have a bunch of rules and stuff like that. But the app kind of tied everything together into one place for them. That was kind of the power of the application. Plus, it integrated with all their back office stuff. It wasn't super complicated software. You certainly could make it complicated, just like everything else. You can make it complicated. Basically, the company started with one application. We had one mobile application, and then every trucking company in the world wants to go out to their drivers and say, well, wow, we're thinking about you. We're customizing our software for you, the truck drivers. So they would ask for constant little updates and new features and stuff that's like specific to their company, but the company was willing to pay for them because it made them better at driver retention. Because employee retention is a huge thing in trucking because it's it's very hard to keep truck drivers. Ooh. Those guys turn over very, very fast because they can get a job anywhere like that. As long as they have a clean driving license, they can get a job.
And even that asterisk.
Right.
Cloudy area.
Yeah. It's actually a very interesting field because those guys, like that economy didn't really slow down. Plus, it's a great predictor of the U.S. economy, trucking, because when you see freight shipments starting to slow down, the U.S. economy is about to go down too.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Okay. We would have all that data before it impacted later in the market. So it was a pretty cool place to work from a data analytics standpoint. Like Star, I might cut this out. Like the company was terrible at actually using those analytics to do anything.
Oh yeah.
That's why I got the stickies here, just in case we enter any areas. I was like, oh, I got a good one for that one. I'm gonna put that one off to the side.
I like trucking logistics. Like you said, you had the data before anyone else did.
Yeah.
Now, you have some companies that don't do stuff with it. Then you have some companies that overly use that stuff. But I was surprised because the products that we built there in that trucking logistics industry, they were wanting to build good product. And luckily, their head of product were like, can we even get someone? So they went out to big name trucking company and said, can we talk to some of your drivers? And they talked to the drivers and they couldn't get a feel for what exactly the drivers needed to be happy, but also what the companies needed. So you know what they did? They went out and hired people to go on these trucking trips.
Yeah.
And they just sat there. And then when they came back, they interviewed those people, not the truckers, just the people that had to sit in there, the people that were just doing it for the money. And they were like, you know what was the worst pain in my butt?
Yeah.
And they were like, stopping at those weigh stations. It was the worst. It took too much time. And then the company was like, great, we're going to make this software on there. And they went out and what they did is they knew that these weigh stations had electronic weight systems and they all had internet. Mm-hmm. So what they did is they built an app called Weigh Station Bypass. It was great.
Yeah.
And they were like, your truck we're going to put sensors in your truck.
Yep.
And it's going to weigh and it's going to send it. When you go bypass it, it just says, give me a weight, and you send immediate weight back.
I bring that up because what I had to do was we had the one mobile app, right? And that one mobile app started having features that companies were paying for because they wanted to cut the line, basically, right? So it's like a feature factory, but in this instance, the feature factory was okay because companies were willing to basically cut the line for features and pay for them. But then what the features we developed would get rolled out into the entire application. Everybody would have them, but one specific company was like, well, I realize this is not your roadmap, but I want to, how much is it going to cost to put it in your roadmap? They would do that, And I mean, this is probably a good product conversation. I probably should write this one down for later. Things that are not in your product roadmap, but people are willing to cut the line and pay for it to be in your product roadmap. Like, companies are going to say no to that, especially if you're like, well, 2 sprints and we can get that done. Fully everything you're asking for, and you're willing to basically fund my entire development team for 2 sprints. What is the cost of your development team for 2 sprints? Like, just write down what that is, and then I'll write that in on my check, and I'll just pay for it, whatever, or maybe 100% above that, or whatever, 100% profit for your development team.
So you're saying the product, they're paying on the product roadmap, but the fact is it's manipulating your entire product, not just their instance. Like you're not just doing it and then it's only in what they get. Everybody gets this feature. They're just putting it to the front of your back.
Yes. And they were willing to pay for that.
Unless it's a massive disjointed experience from a UX perspective.
Yeah, no.
Why would you say no?
No, it wasn't, because what we would do is we would build it in and we would hide it for every customer who was not them. Like with feature flags, we'd hide it for every customer who was not them. And then until we were sure that the feature was, good and integrated and worked very well, we basically let them shake it down as a beta customer. And then when it was ready, we'd turn it on for everybody. And then we would charge other customers to turn that feature flag on for the other customers.
So you basically have an upcharge, basically.
Yeah.
Well, that's the compartmentalized, like, service-oriented architecture that you're looking for, and that's
great.
Scalable.
It was great, yeah. I will say, like, the architects, I should probably reach out to some, because they're here in Tampa. I probably should reach out to some of the architects that I work with on those type of projects, because implementing the software in the way that they implemented it, and then making the configuration specific for each customer, brilliant. From a marketing and technology perspective, nothing short of brilliant right there.
It's just a la carte. I want this.
Yes,
I don't want
yeah.
this. I want. It's like, you can find that with most softwares nowadays. You're gonna say, I want this software, this software, this software. I don't need that. I want this and I want that. And they're like, oh, great, that's in our Titan package, and that's actually cost minus 20% because you're a loyal customer, and that's what I want.
Yeah, it was great. The problem is every new feature we came up with, sales is like, well, it's one more tool I have to be able to sell the software. So they just kept adding it to the base package. I'm like, guys, you could sell everything separately, man. The whole reason I brought all that up was, again, like the second segue back to the whole reason I brought that up was we had the original mobile applications and we kept adding features like that. What people would ask for is that they would want their own branded customer experience through a mobile app. So we'd have to make a white label app for a specific customer. Mm-hmm. And when you make a white label app, it's pretty simple. I mean, you're taking the core repo for your core app, and you're just spitting off you're just spitting off a copy, basically. So it's all the exact same code as your core app, but maybe it's got a few different features that are different. I remember, like, authentication was a little bit different for every company. Some companies didn't want any authentication. Some companies wanted full-blown, username, password, or whatever. Some companies wanted it to be integrated into their authentication in-house, so you had to basically reach out to their SSO, single sign-on type system to sign into the app. There was a few things that were different in the mobile apps that had to be actually coded into the mobile app for it to work. So when we created white label apps, you basically ran into a situation where we went from having one app, I say one app, but actually it's Android, iOS, so it's one core app is actually two apps.
Yeah.
I remember we went from like 5 or 10 apps in 1 year to like 2 or 3 years later we had like 50. When we roll out a minor change to the core code, it's impossible to test 50 apps. Impossible. Within manual testing, impossible.
Oh, manual, yeah.
Yes, manual testing. And all of the white label apps, you had to know what their little customizations were in order to properly roll that. And if you really wanted to test everything, if you're going back to like the development best practices of everything is automated, automation as much as possible, that minor stuff that you're like, oh, my app should do X, Y, and Z all the time, that stuff should be automated. So we had to go through a period where I as like a little mini product owner in-house who only serviced in-house teams, I was like, I need automation for this, and I need to bring on a QA engineer to build up on an automated framework. So whenever your repo builds and deploys through Jenkins, I think it was Jenkins at the time, I can't remember, and deploys through Jenkins and deploys the new APKs or whatever for the applications, it pulls them down and pulls them into the automation, runs it on a simulator, runs through the automated tests, and then spits out a report at the end. And I the QA manager, can come in, Friday morning or whatever, and I'll see that, green, red. That one build is red. Why is that one build red? And we can have a discussion with the development manager or whatever, my other peers in the organization to figure out what we needed to, because otherwise, like 50 applications, get out of here. There was no way to deal with that with the old method of the Gantt chart of like, we'll release a new application here and we'll do all the testing here and then whatever here, because they all needed maintenance. They weren't projects, they were products. And those products needed to be maintained forever.
Yeah. I mean, you're also dealing with app stores, and they have their own, like, submit the build. They have to approve it. And if they fail it, you could pass it. If they fail it, they fail it. And they kick it right back to you, and it's like, go change.
Well, the other thing about the App Store is occasionally they'll give you mandates. I think Android 8 was back in the day. I think Android 8 had just come out. And they're like, oh, Android 8's coming out, and it's going to like come out for these devices on these days. And I'm like, oh, crap. Well, there's our deadline. There's our hard deadline. Critics of Agile will be like, well, you guys are just kind of like figuring out as you go along or whatever. But like, no, you can easily have hard dates. in Agile projects. Like the Android thing is a perfect example. Like when iOS is coming out with a new version, you need to have your testing and stuff done. You need to shake that version down by the date that they give you, because they're going to go live on your customers' devices. And if it doesn't work, if you never worked on a mobile app, you quickly find out that your customers let you know through ratings in the App Store and angry tweets or whatever immediately if their stuff doesn't work. So you need to be ahead of that, man.
Yeah.
Your roadmap changes based off what's happening in the technology.
And you very rarely get hit with that out of left field in like a day. You usually get that.
No.
So what that just tells you is, okay, starting next sprint, we're rocking and rolling right to meet, 1.x or 2.x or 3.x, because there's a lot of external factors. I mean, it could be, what was the thing that did the data retention policy in Europe? You know what I'm talking about? Where it was opt out of collecting my data.
Right.
I mean, as a company, what are you going to do? You can't say, "Oh, we're not going to abide by that law."
Pull your stuff out of Europe.
Yeah.
No, you're not going.
No, I mean, what GDPR, gross data product, whatever it was. But
it's like a consumer data protection thing.
Yeah, it's just you don't need to circumvent the process in place. You just need to understand. Okay, so I do have a date I got to be there by. So everything's not going to march up to that date.
Right.
I'm just going to align my sprints, and if I get it out ahead of time.
I like the product guy in me. When I hear stuff like that, I've seen a lot of product people that are just pure reactionary. They just react to what's, especially when you get caught when you get caught in a place where you're so busy that you are in a feature factory mode because you just got so many inputs throwing things your way. Especially people more senior in the organization. Like for me, it was C-level executives. I got to have this by this date. I got to have this to sell this. Sales would come to me. I can't sell this customer unless you give me, feature X or whatever by this date. And they would give me a date. What does feature X mean? And what does that date mean? Like how much do I need to deliver to you by that date? And we can adjust the roadmap. I can take that back to leadership and we can negotiate what that means. Sometimes I would push back on leadership and be like, this is like, how big is this customer? Like, are we talking about 1,000 transactions a month? Or are we talking about 1 million transactions a month? Like, what are we talking about with this customer? Like, why am I pausing my whole roadmap to potentially sign this customer who's given us 0 transactions right now over all these other customers that we're serving? The best product people will challenge. They'll go immediately to challenge mode when given something where they're not given 100% of the information. But again, like, I feel like I'm dipping now into like, this is a culture thing. This is a culture thing, especially a culture that runs up against the principles of Agile, where like transparency is not a big thing. Everyone's kind of guarding their little department, and they're not out in the open with everything. I don't really know where I'm going with this.
No. The good thing about it is you immediately, what you said struck a chord, and it's where I have a 9-year-old daughter, and she teaches me more about business than 60-year-old millionaire that I interact with. And everyone's like, how? I was like, you'd be surprised at how much you can put her and say, I'm going to do a lemonade stand, and she goes down to knowing what her costs are, and she lays them out, and she knows how much she has to sell it for to make a profit.
Yeah.
But it's crazy that 60-year-old guy can lose sight of that. And I know it's a much more complicated factory, but I mean, she knows it. And just like you said, I mean, if you ask your kid to do something, why? Why? And it's like the product owner that you just mentioned is that kid. It was dad and mom. And you hope you don't get the response because I said so. Because nobody learns in that scenario. Yeah. But then what do we react to? The loudest person in the room. And that's the worst part about it. Is because in the human, you take the human element into account. Someone yells at you in your face. Your reaction isn't to the quiet person. It's the one that's in your face and threatening. And it's like you like you said, there's a culture thing. And I think it's less about, it's not about having bad communication. It's more so, I wish I knew. I wish I could know. It's just that human element, some of the things, that intangible stuff that you can't explain, but you have to say, look, I'm hearing what you're saying and you're loud, and you're being loud because you want me to hear you, and I do hear you. Yeah. But on paper, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. On paper, I can't go to the board, CTO, the CEO, the CFO, and start writing checks for something that's I'm not gonna make my money back. That's what my job is as the product owner. But I appreciate your insight, and I do think that it has a spot. It's just not it's not, the spot is not disrupting the current sprint and taking us off a roadmap. This spot is, it's got a seat at the table now.
Yeah, I went through this when I was deployed at a software startup. I talked with the CEO and the CFO. I think I talked on the phone, and they're like, "Well, what's your, everybody is like suspicious of consultants." I get it. Like, I'm not saying like don't be suspicious of consultants. You certainly should. You're paying them. You want to know what you're getting. You pay them, right? But what I told those guys was, I was like, look, man, it was sort of like an agile transformation, but they were bringing me in for product, basically. They're bringing me in for product, but I came in as like like at a chief product owner type of level. I sat with the leadership team, that kind of level, but I wasn't really like, it wasn't really like chief. I was just
like
consulting. Yeah. I came in, and I think you had two guys that started the company, and they brought in another person to be the CFO, because they, the two people that started the company had a lot of deep domain experience, but they needed someone actually could deal with numbers and could deal with finances. So they brought in somebody that they knew from another company to be their CFO, to basically manage everything, right? So they were the visionary moving forward, and he was the kind of like nuts and bolts kind of guy. But they brought me in to do product, and the first thing I sat down was, the first thing I did was I was like, look, guys, I need to fly in, and we need to sit down in a room to hammer out, just at the C level, what is the future of your product? You had two founders, and they didn't agree on the future of the product, right? And then you had the CFO, and he had a different take, because he kind of observed. He didn't have the deep domain expertise, but he observed what was happening. So he had a different level of expertise, because he talks to customers and stuff like that once they get to the finance side. So he had a different take on it, on what was important to the customers, right? Because he had to interact with all the customers. So I flew in, and I got them all in a room, and the first thing I said was like, well, these are the features that we're working on, right? The broad high level. I'm not down the user story level at that point. I'm way up here in the clouds. I'm at, what things do we want to give to customers in the product? And of those things, like, how do we charge for these? How do we make sure that we're taking revenue for each one of these things? I want to be able to recoup the cost of the development team, because this is a startup. If you don't recoup the cost of the development team after every sprint, you're going to set the whole company behind. So everything was like frantic level. It's probably making it sound worse than it is, but everything was a frantic amount of planning to make sure that your costs were covered, just because the company had a great potential to grow, but you had to be careful about what you implemented in what order. Because if you implemented 2-3 sprints worth of stuff trying to chase customers, and then those customers never signed, you basically have to go back to your investors and ask for more money. Okay, we built some great new features, but we can't monetize those features. Sorry.
So you say you'd go back to investors. So is this company that you're speaking about living, was that like a quarter by quarter, like,
oh, yeah,
we're going to make a decision whether if you have a bad quarter, it's a possible of get out now?
Well, what they would do is they just recycle the executive leadership or whatever. They just change the CEO.
Like a no confidence vote?
Yeah. That's the investors. Yeah, well, that's that's a
startup world.
You start, I was going to say, you start your company with venture capital, and then you're at the mercy of your investors to do as they say, because they're basically funding everything. And they did that once when I was there. They changed the CEO out.
I've not done many startups, but the last startup that I went to, which was local here, I saw that, and I, you were at the product level. I was brought on to be a coach, and I was coaching. What ended up happening was somebody wore the hats of CFO, CTO, sales, everything. They held everything. And then as a startup, once your company gets above a certain level, that person has to relegate those duties to an actual CTO, and they bring in experience usually, and it ends up becoming a very sore subject, because if that person was employee 5 in the company, they have a very close, but it's a kind of a let it go. And what I found, the CEO had to stay involved and go, look, I'm a coach. I'm here paid on a quarterly basis. I'm only here because you want to basically show to your investors that this investment that they got is paying off, because you can grow this company from when I started with 60 to over 200 people in less than 4 months, and you can handle it. But what I'm telling you is they need your direction to know, because what I'm hearing from how the CTO, because the only reason I joined this company was their investors made a massive, I think it was 200-300 million in a 60-person company.
Yeah.
And they had no sales team. The product sold itself. So if we're building and we're starting to expand this product even more, I need to know where are we going, and that's kind of where I went back to is you got to build compartmentalized software, a la carte features, flip on here, but you can't stand each customer can have its own instance because your costs were going from a 60 to 200 person. That's a lot of money a year.
Yeah.
Every instance costs money. You better hope that every instance that costs money, you're making your money back on. And then when you take features, it's like, okay, company A, I'm going to put the feature out here. Well, the dev team that made that, they put it here. Okay, then they have to put it here, and then 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 here. And then are you going to go back, and when you go to put those things in, are you telling this company, hey, by the way, it's going to be X amount of dollars? It's opposed to one platform and then saying, oh, by the way, here's our new features, and if you want them, they cost this much money. And if they don't want them, guess what? Your costs don't increase, but you did develop them, and you developed them because you hope that a couple of companies said that they did want it, and they will buy it. It's a startup mode, right? What are you going to do?
There's not an easy answer. I mean, the answer is don't start from being behind. You know what I mean? Like start with the model of like when you onboard, here's what you get, and if you want new stuff, you have to pay for it. To take it back to a different company I've worked with, they built an API, like a back-end API to their system that customers could integrate with their system. But they didn't have any kind of like rules about transactions. They didn't have any rules about transactions. So I'm like, guys, you just sold your API key for like $10,000 to get an API key, and that's great. Like I'm happy you made $10,000. But some people are gonna like fire off 200, 500, 600 API requests in a month or whatever. But some people are going to fire off 1 million API requests. What does that do to our back-end infrastructure? If you keep the budget for the back-end infrastructure with the back-end infrastructure team, and then develop the effects of the development team, they never see that budget.
Cost.
That cost, yeah. I was like, if they never see that, they're implementing things that let customers drive that cost up, but then that cost is maintained on a different balance sheet, and you don't have good budgeting for your product. I was like, where are we going, man? We're heading for disaster.
What ended up happening with that company that you were talking about where the two CEOs had different visions?
So what happened was, thanks. Back to the topic at hand. So I flew in and I got everybody in a room. It was like everybody, but it was like 5 people. It was like a CEO, CTO, CFO, operations, and like sales or something like that. It was like 5 people. Wouldn't like it's a startup. That's like 5 people is like a quarter of the company.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah, but basically, I got the department heads. I think maybe the head of like support popped in and out occasionally. But anyway, I got the department heads in the room, and I was like, our product. What does our roadmap look like? Where do we want to go? Like what markets are we trying to break into? What's the 3-month goal? What's a 6-month goal? What's a 12-month goal? And if possible, if we have enough time to get to 18 months plus, star, because after 6 months, you have to put a star on everything you do, because who knows? Who knows?
Your confidence level
you have no
low
idea.
Because people are changing.
Basically, I put a column on the board for everybody. I was like, here's all the sales, and here's whatever, and here's whatever. There's models for product management to create roadmaps, different procedures, different exercises you can use to create a roadmap when you don't really have a solid roadmap. It starts with coming up with your product vision, your boilerplate. Like if you go to CSM class, they'll show you like the boilerplate for the product vision. As a whatever company, we're producing whatever, which is better than these other competitors. Like we came up with that first before we started, and anything that didn't link into the product vision got thrown out. That was pretty simple. But then I put a swim lane up for every different department, and I was like, okay, well, what does this department need? What does this department need? And I remember the technology department, when I got there, the technology department, like the CTO technology department, they were getting nothing done because none of their features that they needed to get done had any ROI behind it. Just because they haven't been, it's not true. They totally had like moving to single sign-on, migrating to different Elasticsearch. They use AWS, so everything was a different Elasticsearch. But migrating based on conditions or transactions or whatever to different servers. Like they had a bunch of technology-related stuff that like basically meant nothing to the business because they didn't understand.
But they enabled quicker,
definitely
faster, more secure avoidance,
like real-time backups. I basically lined up what everybody wanted, feature level, what everyone wanted, and then I kind of showed like, well, this is kind of what our velocity is similar to right now, close to, because I had just come on, so the velocity wasn't totally stable, but I can make a wild guess, erring on the side of more rather than less. And I was like, given what we have on here, like we have a 2-year plan. Like this is supposed to be 3 months. We have a 2-year plan on the board. I was like, so let's start like deciding like what is critical. And I got them to roadmap I got them to take all like a 2-year plan and break it down to what do we have to do in the next 3 months. And then I took that 3 months, I took it back to the team through a combination of normal scheduled refinements and then ad hoc refinements as I needed to talk about important things that maybe were not necessarily directly in front of the team, but I kind of needed to talk with the team about in order to figure out how big they would be or whatever. Things were kind of like out of left field. I brought based on the stories, figured out how long it would take, because our estimation was actually pretty good. Our estimation was very close to how long it would take things to be. And I rolled that back up to the roadmap, into the features, cut some stories out, cut some features down, split some features, did some other magic at the roadmap level, and I came up with the next couple months worth of work, which we actually hit. Like I signed on. I think I signed on that company for it was a short consulting transformation type of contract, like
a quarter.
Yeah, something like that. I think it was even shorter than that. But I ended up turning that into like a 6, 7, 8 month engagement. I turned it because by the time they couldn't get rid of me because I was like basically holding the whole. I wasn't holding it hostage, but I was basically like keeping all of that moving forward by myself. Because you can do that at a small company. You can keep all that stuff moving by yourself. At a larger company, you really can't, because there's too many inputs. There's too many conversations happening on the side, too many inputs to the roadmap happening. Do this. It's absolutely comes down from the top type of stuff. The funny thing is the road mapping stuff and getting everybody in a room and kind of like facilitating that and letting them argue it out, and always like bringing them back to metrics whenever they would like go off and not make progress. Mm-hmm. I'd take a break, try to gather metrics, and try to bring them back based on what the actual metrics were. I'd be like, well, how many customers want this? How many transactions do we expect out of them? What do we expect to charge for this? Can we, which features are we implementing and what can we charge for and what can't we charge for? What technical things are we implementing that could, the threat of not doing them will derail all of our technology, all of our ability to expand and stuff like that. That's the other thing product owners are not really good at, is the cost of not doing something.
Some product owners are not good at cost benefit at all. And it's not a good thing. I mean, it's how much damage can you really do if in startups your costs are exacerbated, right? Mm-hmm. One, like you said, one bad sprint, one bad quarter means life or death for startups. When you work for bigger companies, what do they say? They assume, the checks are there. We have customers, and we're not. Anything you do is not going to lose it. So if you're customer obsessed, that's fine, because guess what? The money's still going to be coming in, and as long as the software that we're asking to build is right for the customer, that's there. But like you said, you had to lay out 6 months, and you were kind of the glue.
Yeah.
But you hope, I guess, at some point you're able to step back and go, guys, I've done this in front of you how many times now? You know how to do it. Like, you were Miyagi in them, right?
Yeah.
Well, you're kind of Mr. Miyagi.
Well, the trade-off was, when I started, it was like a project manager in a pool of whatever, 30, 40 people. And I was like, no. I was like, this is not going to work. 30, 40 people across all the applications, this is not going to work. They actually had 2 or 3 products. So I was like, let's split the products by product lines. Let's split the team by products, because certain team members only worked on certain products. I was like, let's just formalize this, split it all up. Once we split it all up, I split the roadmaps up by product. So we had a mobile roadmap, and we had a website roadmap, and we had a back-end data infrastructure type roadmap, because we had that work was all contracted. It was all just pay to play kind of stuff to pay outside firms to do, but which is kind of nice. They were willing to just cut a check to get things done, speed it up. It's nice when you have outside vendors to, if you can cut a check and have an outside vendor team implement an entire feature, sign me up. If they're good.
If they're good.
Yeah.
That's the issue is in the sales room, they look good on paper.
I know. No, we were lucky in that we had a CTO on that team. We had a CTO who he knew people in all kinds of places he was like, these guys are rock stars. Cut them a check, they'll get it done, and they did. So yeah.
Spoiled.
Yeah, he was very well. I mean, that's why you pay your CTO. He knows how to knock that kind of stuff out. The problem is, like, when I got there, everything was on him. We need programming done. We need infrastructure done. We need database work done. We need this done. We need that done. And they're like, we just go to this guy.
We only have so many people.
We just go to that's CTO at a startup. He's like, we just go to this guy because he can figure it all out. But when I got there, I'm like, how do you know what the number one feature that you need for your business is? And how do you know what analytics are being done to prove that? And how do you know when a feature is implemented, how do you know that you're getting your money back off of it? And how you know you're getting adoption? And so he's like, I'm glad somebody's asking these questions because he's like, I just don't have time to answer all these questions. He's like, I'm just trying to keep the lights on. And the other thing is, like, big company, small company, doesn't really matter. Like, being honest with people is probably the number one thing, especially in consulting, but it holds true anywhere else. The first thing I did when I was like, listen, man, when people come to you, the CTO, and they're like, when's it going to be done? How much is it going to cost? That's the only questions they have. When's it going to be done? How much is it going to cost me? I was like, dude, how much is it going to cost me should just be a function of how much does the development team cost per point per sprint, right? So if I can take the development team's cost and say, well, my development team costs $10,000 per sprint, and we do 100 points per sprint, then there's a fixed cost. If you're doing product and not projects, there should be some kind of fixed cost with the development team. As long as you're not bringing people in and cutting people all the time where you have
that's the issue. Everyone thinks that's how it works. And
no.
It's like, look, I mean, you hire a team, and what you want that team to do is there. Now, granted, if you say we're going to this brand new technology, we're going to go from J2EE to standard, OO JavaScript, and so we know we need a JavaScript expert. That's one thing. Supplement the team, share the knowledge, but that fixed cost is everything. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, how would you ever expect, one, camaraderie if you're just constantly moving people in and out, but two, how do you expect to control your costs? Because you can't just you can throw money at it, but you're also throwing money. You might as well just take 25% of that and throw it in the trash too.
I like to be, at least when you're establishing your roadmap, I like to be with all the stakeholders because I think that's the most efficient way to establish your roadmap. But for the day-to-day stuff, when you're not going back to road mapping phase, which how often are you going back to road mapping phase? Every quarter?
Maybe.
Every half? I would push the company to not do it more than twice a year. So every half. If you're doing it every quarter, that's probably the absolute most I would tolerate. Because if you go back to your roadmap, it's sort of like it could be like a soft reset of your backlog, because you potentially could pivot your entire backlog to other more important things if you're going back to your roadmap. And you're really bringing every company, especially large companies, you can't bring executives in at every single level. But if you bring that kind of like leadership level focus into your roadmap, and you could end up throwing out your whole backlog. And that's just not something I'm willing to do more than it's like a couple times a year, So that's why I tell them, I was like, look, man, I'm all about being 100% remote. But there are some things that are way more efficient to do in person.
Yeah.
Road mapping, I really believe, is one of them. But anyway, metrics that executives care about or leadership cares about. Leadership, executives, it's kind of the same level.
Yeah. People, VIPs, stakeholders.
Yeah.
Really anything. It defines on like who they are, right? Because if I'm just writing the checks and wanting to know when is this coming in, I'm going to know one thing. So I see this all the time, and the issue is that you have very concerned stakeholders, and they want to help, and I don't think they mean it in the worst way possible. And there's a level of trust at which they insert themselves, but some people will say, is this item in QA?
Yeah.
And as a stakeholder, is this in testing? What about this item? Is this in dev? Is this in testing? Is this here? The level of trust that you have to help them, especially in an agile environment, is saying, look, when we make a commitment, the status is that we are committing to have it done by September 20th. I committed that the sprint ends on September 20th. and that's when it's done by. So as an executive, if any executive out there listening right now, but you take a step back as why would I even care about this story being in a QA? Right. Because if it's in development or QA, it doesn't really matter if you're actually truly set up and structured in the way that really needs to support that agile culture. It doesn't matter where it's at in the process.
No.
On September 20th or 21st or whenever you push to staging, right, for your users to get in and do some testing, it's either all or not. Yep. And that comes down to is, do you have a culture of where you're constantly missing your commitments? Because that's why they're wondering is like, oh, so I see this item hasn't even been started, so it's probably not going to get in. Well, as an executive, what should you really care about? You should care about trust, but I also find another red flag in there is, as an executive, there are metrics that aren't necessarily based around team productivity that you should care about, and a lot of companies don't ask. The two biggest questions I always tell people is, if you're measuring velocity, but you're not asking the two most important questions to your users. One, how do you feel about the current build of your product? Mm-hmm. Are you happy or mad about it? Just users test it. Do you like it? Do you not like it? You could go yes or no. You could go 1 through 5. Doesn't really matter. And then, based on 1 through 5, how happy are you with the overall usability of the product, or just how happy are you overall with this mobile app? And then let them know, because if you're not asking those questions, it doesn't matter how many features you're pushing out in a sprint, right? You could say I'm pumping out 102 features, but your customers say, I don't like it. I don't like your product at all. You know what I mean? So it's crazy that as an exec, you care about a lot of things, as in, when's this feature coming out? What's your velocity? You're right to ask about defect rate because you assume that those are directly correlated with the happiness of your users. But if you're not even asking about your users, hey, how do you like the product? It's crazy to me, right?
What you're talking about is Net Promoter Score.
Yeah.
Net Promoter Score. I don't know a way to get that other than surveys, but I did a podcast where I talked about this, like how you get your Net Promoter. We did Net Promoter Score through a mobile app one time, where we did ratings through a mobile app 1 through 5, like what you just said. And what we found was like there was like an art in asking for the Net Promoter Score, because depending on where you were, like usually what we would find is we would trigger the survey basically after a successful transaction. If you had a transaction that was not successful, we would not trigger the survey. We'd only trigger the survey after you did something that was successful and that went through, and the normal process ended normally. So there was like a kind of like a some special magic, like a little shell game of prompting for the Net Promoter Score. But I could see where if you were like a head of product or something like that, and you wanted to get a more fair or broad survey of your application, I could see where you might want to ask it at different places. I don't know.
You definitely want to. I don't know if you follow. There's a lot of guys in Dallas that are like amazing at. That's where like UX goes, and UX has an art form for how they ask the questions, because what they want to do is they want to get something. It's not biased. They want to make sure it's something that's not leading. They don't want to catch you at that happy time. They also don't want to catch you at the sad time. Right. So there's different ways that they say to go about it. As long as you're asking the question, even if it's not wholly accurate, someone's going to remember that one bad time. And the way that you can get the feedback, I mean, even in the most simplest of surveys, is really just 1 through 5. I've got 2 questions for you. Are you happy with the app? Or are you going to tell somebody about the app? Are you happy with the app? Are you happy with the current build versus the overall of the, what? Just tell me something, because you think about, as an executive, going back to that metrics, you're so caring about how many things that you can get out. You've stopped even asking the people who are using the product if they're happy with it, because you could say, I'm building 50 of the greatest features in the world, and then someone interviews their users and they say, I don't like the app. It's like, great, your velocity means nothing. I'd rather have a velocity of 2, knowing that the users are happy with the app, because guess what? Happy users means recurring revenue, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, there's another metric that executives might be interested in called, I can't remember what it's called, adoption rate. When you implement a new feature, like how many of your users actually use that feature? It's like, is it like 20%? We're going to implement a new feature where you can click on it. Like Facebook does this all the time. They'll add new features and they won't tell anyone, and they'll just see who discovers this. Or sometimes they'll add a feature, I can't remember what it's called. It's called like a hidden door or secret door feature or something like that, where you find it and you click on it and then it says, yeah, this feature will be implemented soon or whatever, but they're actually only measuring how many people are interested in that. Facebook did this with...
They initially did it with pirate language way back in the day.
Yeah, they did it with something. Facebook has like a dating app or something built into it now or something like that. I think they did it with that originally, where like you clicked the link and it did nothing originally. And then they were like, oh, X percentage of our users click on it. Now we should build something.
Well, it does something now, I'll tell you that. Those of us that are single out there now know where to go.
Oh, Jesus. But like that's an example of like they did that. They were like, well, we're going to add this new link in our menus and then collect stats on what percentage of people click it. And, maybe we'll figure out what to build. I started following people who talk about the lean startup. I brought this up on a podcast before. There are people out there that think the lean startup is kind of crap. I love presenting ideas terribly when I say them, just to kind of throw it out there. But they'll be like, well, the lean startup is kind of crap because the best companies have a strong product vision and then lead from there based on their product vision and start developing the product. And then as they develop their product based on where their vision takes them, then they'll adjust. But they have to have that mainline vision to go forward with. They don't really just start throwing something out there or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know. I kind of see where you're going, but I also kind of don't agree with it. I don't know. I could probably be on either side of it. Anyway, the point of me bringing that up is like, this is a way to be like, let me introduce something that I'm not sure there's a market for and throw it out there, and then I will build the features as people express interest in it. So this is like one of those inspect and adapt things that is interesting because you don't see a lot of products being built purely on inspect and adapt. You know what I mean? You see them being built on, we think that there's a market here, we're going to start building features, and as people come in and start using the features, after we built it, then we'll start measuring and deciding or whatever.
But that's a good thing though, because that's just understanding usability, but what are people looking at, and then some people are going as far as reading. And then I was part of a company that had a checkbox on a confirmation of completeness. So you go out and fill out this form, and then a pop-up would pop up, and you'd have to hit submit. And I remember they added a checkbox once that says, check this box because we told you to hit this checkbox. That was the language next to it.
Yeah.
And they had like a 10% rate of people actually checked the box. And so they were able to gather that metric and say, if we had a warning message, this pop-up is doing nothing.
Right, yeah.
So they decided that said, well, good. So what did we figure out is we figured out that this one extra step where it has a pop-up to make sure that you're ready to submit, because they were getting a lot of inaccurate data getting submitted to this portal. And they were like, we're just going to get rid of it. I'd rather just, knowing that the data is probably not going to be right, just go ahead and submit it. Or if you're going to submit it, check and then submit and whatever. And as you said, the iteration, I mean, you have to get into the minds of your users. And back to execs is, if you're not asking your users, how satisfied are you? Or even trying to figure out, hey, I'm just going to go out and build a feature.
Yeah.
But I don't even know. If you're blue oceaning it, why not try to go more down that path, be more forward thinking? But the questions a lot of execs are asking now is velocity. How many stories are in dev? How many stories are in test? When can I UAT? Those types of things.
Throughput. This all falls into the banner of throughput. I'm going to write it down so I remember it. I think throughput is a garbage metric for executives. I don't think they should care about throughput. I think it should be focused on outcome and not throughput at all. Well, let me think about what I want to say for a second, because like my mind's there's a train wreck, just like a train derailment just happened in my mind for a second when you went down the road of throughput. Any executive asking me about throughput, immediately like red flags are going off, because you start asking me about throughput and like the next thing I expect you're going to lead into is like, how do I know I'm getting 6.5 hours per developer every day behind keyboards? Dude, like, why does that matter to you? Like, why does that matter to you, number one? And where are we going with that? Like, we're going to a very bad place first, I expect.
Yeah.
With a throughput metric. So I understand why someone would ask for a throughput metric. Show me how many, but at a higher level, because you're executive. Show me how many features per week, month, quarter, whatever, my team can implement. That's a very watered down throughput metric, because the product owner has a lot of they can manipulate that a lot because they can just break their features and break their user stories and stuff like that. You know what I mean? They can break them down infinitely, basically, to mess with that metric. But I would expect over time it would stabilize, given you have the same people in place, right? Okay, yeah,
caveat, of course.
Yeah, star, right? Keep changing your teams, and nothing will ever stabilize. I could see throughput being useful at an executive level, at a high level, at a really high level, to say how many features can we send through in a quarter. And if I know I only have 20 features in a quarter, then I will generally have an idea of what my forecast is going to look like. The only reason to roll throughput up to an executive level is for forecasting, I would think.
Forecasting, or if you really are truly racing a speed to market against a competitor, that's another thing that I would say is where they could really be, if they understand truly the minimum viable of which they need to go to market, they want to know that they're going to put the product out there. They want to know when, and if they're going by, it has to have these things. And I know that I want to beat company B, and I'm company A, I can expect to get that out in September. So unless they're going to try to beat me in September, I'm going to beat them to market. And and I get it. That's a true competitive advantage. But most times you're not in that situation.
Well, I mean, it would be better to present like a cycle time, lead time than throughput. You know what I mean? Let's strip it down and say you're a small company, right? Then you have a throughput metric, so you know how many stories per sprint or whatever your team does, and maybe you know how many features per sprint your team, or features/epics, whatever it is, per sprint or per sprints or per quarter, whatever to roll up. I would think that cycle time, lead time at that point would be more beneficial to you to know from when we first introduce a story or a feature. Again, we're talking at executive level, so I think features would probably be more important to them than at a low story level. How long does it take from the first point that I generated the item until it gets into production, or whatever the measure of my definition of done is, right? We'll call that, I'm going to say production, and just keep saying that. Versus how long does it take an item to be picked up from when it's first generated by the development team, and then how long does it take once it's inside the development team to get to my done point? Right, because that's a lead time versus cycle time, and I can never remember. Like, I'm so terrible. One of them is like the entire measure of that, and one of them is just when the development team picks it up.
I think the dev team is cycle.
I think the dev team cycle. I always get that confused.
I think, and that's the issue is the assumption that you measure that metrics is under that your product owner is empowered and does say no. Because if you have a never-ending backlog...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
The things that go to the bottom...
Well, I mean, I don't know if this is executive worthy. I think it probably... we're going to put throughputs... We star next to throughput because we're not done with that. Your backlog health... That's
a big one.
That's a separate item than throughput, so I'll put it over here. That goes back to your backlog health. So in your backlog health, what's the percentage of items that are inside of a time frame, right? So how many items are older than 90 days and are still persisting in your backlog? Okay, well, maybe 90 days is like a normal cycle for you. Maybe 180 plus days. So how many items in your backlog are over 180 days? Because what is the term? It's emergent, right? Your backlog is emergent. It's supposed to be, your backlog is like, as the teams pull stuff in, it's emerging out of your backlog what the highest priority things are. But why keep things in your backlog that you know you're never going to do? I mean, is there a time limit to know that once items are aging over that time limit, to just cut them and be like, hey, they were good ideas, but they just didn't make the cut? I'm going to close them. They'll still be in the backlog, so I can search for them and reopen them or whatever if I need to. But they just yeah.
Well, that comes down to, you got to ask the additional question. There is, if I'm pumping out 16 stories a sprint, am I creating 20 every sprint? Because then it's growing by more than you're burning.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's the key caveat there, is that it's really hard to say, but it's actually understanding that there does need to be a prioritization, and there's also a cleanup. And this is what I did, is there was a cleanup time, because at some point I go back in there and I'm like, gosh, were we actually going to do a show that drink feature? that doesn't even make any sense. At the time, it sounded great, but as I learned more about my user, that doesn't sound great anymore.
Right. This is the magic of refinement. I mean, you can do it with your team. There's nothing that dictates the strategy of the actual refinement and how it happens, probably on purpose. But this is one of the things where I'm like, product owner, maybe like the next 10 years of the field with respect to product ownership will evolve, and we'll kind of standardize some of these things. But the backlog health, I would think that a good measure of your backlog health, if I was a chief product owner or like a VP level, where I have multiple product owners who worked under me, I would want some kind of, what percentage of your backlog is more than 180 days old? That been open for more than 180 days or whatever. Or you'd have to, the problem is it's too easy to like make a game out of it. There's a certain amount of time we should just be like, look, this is not making the cut. We gotta cut it.
Well, that's when I think it comes down to and again, I don't know how you've ever done it, but in the past for me, it's been stories always roll up to features.
Yeah.
And as I'm planning that quarter, I'm getting a good thought of, I've got these 18 features I want to get in there. But I don't have all those 18 feature stories made out.
No.
And if a story is going to pop up, and this is the issue, is that people have stories that pop up and they can't roll it to a feature.
Right.
That's when you have to really like pause and say, why am I here? What is this going on?
Right.
But when that feature's on your roadmap and hey, we're probably going to knock out maybe 1 or 2 features a sprint. Okay, great. Those are the stories that I need done. And then if I've prioritized by the quarter and I have these 18 in there and I prioritize those features, then I know that the next 2 to 4 features need to have those stories. Anything below that, I haven't created it yet.
Yeah.
I left it in feature format. Yeah. And if there's other features like Q2, Q3, Q4 out there, I don't have those stories in the backlog yet.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because I basically say, what's the feature that it rolls up into? And if I can't find a feature for it, I won't say that I won't say no, but I will say that I need to do a little bit more digging before I even try to impact anyone with this shower thought, because that's probably what it is. If I can't find a feature for it to come up there, somebody got in a shower and said, it'd be cool to have. Is that thing. And that, again, back to what all tied this together is executive metrics is, you want them thinking at the feature level. The story level, it's great. And don't get me wrong, if they want to pop in and just use it to say yes, but most of those metrics, if we're humans, we're innate trying to get the smiles out of people. If I can figure out how to game that to make you happy, I'm going to game the heck out of it. That I'm a human. It's what I'm going to do. I've seen dev team after dev team, even though they mean great, they care about the product, they do all the fun stuff, they'll find a way to game those metrics if you make it to be the thing that makes you happy. But when you're focused on customer satisfaction, you can't game that. There's no way to game that. Unless, asterisk, you ask them whenever they're happiest in your app. But the development team should be using the metrics for themselves. So what metrics should they care about? As an executive, I know I'm getting my money back when I look at costs. Those metrics I care about, and I'm looking at, the product is good enough that it's selling itself, or if I put it in a prospective customer's hands, high chance of conversion because it's that good of an app. It wows them. Measuring my throughput, I get it. If you're developing an internal app and you're going to force people to use your app, then that's fine. Not a good business to be in, but whatever. No,
I don't like throughput. I just don't think throughput is great to show to executives at all. I would rather show them feature adoption. I'd rather show them adoption to show that look, we put this feature out. Maybe we thought it was high priority or whatever, but only 10% of our users have adopted it. Especially if I'm on an internal. I was a product owner, little tiny mini product owner for internal tools that just supported all the in-house systems that we had. If you needed to interface with an in-house system or look something up in a database or build a dashboard based off of things you could pull into your analytics, that was my product owner space. And if I was going to go give you a new piece of data to pull into a dashboard, but then nobody actually pulled that new piece of data into a dashboard, why do we even develop that feature? Why do we even make these tables available in our analytics platform if nobody's going to use them? It's cool. It certainly is to be able to report on this and this and this, but nobody's actually showing it on their executive dashboards.
And executives should care about that. Product owners should care about it. Does it mean a lot to the dev team? Maybe. You asterisk that, because the part about that is the dev team members are probably looking to someone who's an expert in designing, whether it's a UX designer that's part of the team, and they're going to be doing that. But what's crazy is that metrics that you just talked about has the customer in mind. Execs being more customer focused versus throughput, because when you tell me that you're caring about how many items are in dev, how many items are in queue, that means that, and just a red flag to me is you have a trust issue. Right. You think that you're putting in money and people are taking your money and just sitting on their hands. Mm-hmm. And that hurts if you don't have people that you can trust at the Scrum Master level or something. And then maybe it's the Scrum Master's not conveyed to you that they can do their job. Mm-hmm. It also could be not understanding the Agile environment. But at the end of the day, I do see it as a trust issue when execs stop focusing on the customer and start focusing too much on the day-to-day.
Yeah.
You are dealing with people, because I don't want to just broadly throw people in a bucket.
No, I get it. I highlighted this briefly on the podcast where it didn't come off well because I didn't really wrap it very well in the agenda of the podcast. It was more like emotional. I try to stay away from that. I try to, if I'm going to present something emotionally, I'll at least come up with either an experience that backs it up or some kind of data mm-hmm. or industry insight that backs it up. But I think that when you're dealing with an executive that just refuses and absolutely demands throughput as a metric, at some point that rolls back to ego on some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. Either because they don't trust because they don't believe in agility, or they came up with some other process, or they came up with a traditional project management mindset where they're like, how do I know that everyone's turning in their 8 hours per day? I tell people this all the time. It's probably because your organization is measuring the wrong things, and that's probably why you're supporting even being asked for this kind of stuff. Your organization is supporting this idea of measuring utilization over capacity. I think that's what I mean. Utilization over capacity, meaning that everyone is actually working 8 hours per day, rather than the team is turning out X number of work items, or whatever a sustainable pace of work items is. Key underlying phrase there is sustainable.
Yeah. And what define is sustainable, because you could churn out 20 things, but then your defect rate's through the roof. Your escape defect rate.
And I've done that as a product owner before. I've directly been responsible as a product owner before to say, look, a lot of our customer deadlines and a lot of our technical implementation deadlines and things are kind of hitting at the same point. So I kind of ramp the team to work faster during one sprint, and you'll see our productivity spike for one sprint. And then they'll come back down to normal. And I tell management all the time, I'm like, look, our normal velocity is 65, 70 or whatever. We hit 100 this past sprint, but I was like, I'm not doing that we're burning the team at both ends doing this. I'm gonna let it return to stability for a couple sprints, and then I'll burn them again to get to hit our next deadline. But let everybody know this is a deviation from the normal. This is not normal.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's something out there. It's hoping to reach someone. I think this one's a big one. Is this topic is something that could have been our entire podcast, because executives focusing on the wrong thing. Again, like you said, sometimes it's ego. Sometimes it's just, it's forgetting. It's forgetting what matters.
Yeah.
And you only get in the business of Agile, and some people get into Agile because they want to move faster. It's like, you're not. It's customer first.
Ego is probably not the right thing. It's probably more of, let me think about someone's background for a second, right? They come from a background, let's say they come from a background of project management, and automatically they're learned command and control. Okay. So that doesn't lend itself to letting people learn on their own and letting the team come up. The other side of that is somebody who's like a developer by trade, and they're used to doing everything by themselves, and they're used to my work is great, and my code is fantastic, and everyone else's code is garbage and spaghetti, and I can't go in it. They've never really learned to work with other people. They were just judged on their own metrics. So when they move into leadership, they've never been judged on how they work with other people, and they've never been judged on how they train other people. And now they're being judged completely not on their own work, not on what they individually produce anymore. So unless your corporate culture / office / executives have some kind of training program where they train their managers, let alone people in executive level. And I would posit that most project managers are not individual contributors. They are middle managers. Regardless of where they're placed in the organization, project managers by role are middle managers. Mm-hmm. Okay? Again, the command and control is a management function. So it could be that this is just a function of the way people were trained to work with other people. And that's very difficult to break,
Back to the initial point, it's humans. It's dealing with that human element of history, sporadic behavior. I mean, it's just hard. And that's, I say the fortunate and unfortunate thing is that's what keeps people like you and me in business. It's the only thing that keeps us in business, because if people were easy to figure out, you wouldn't need people to come in and help and give coaching or be that type of seasoned product owner. You'd be able to train that, and you just can't. It's just dealing with people. That's the big kicker in an agile environment is there's a level of people involved, right? So
I think what we're saying is get rid of all the people.
Okay. This conversation is lights out.
Yeah. Hang on one second. I'm not even going to pause it. I'll just cut all this out.
Cut that bad joke out, please.